Today's episode of Poets at War is sponsored by the following.
I'm Ian Wilson, and I create graphic art using primarily traditional methods, supplementing with digital where it's needed. I use a real pen, a real paper, a real graphite to make my art. I like to feel my art. I've always been this way. I love the feeling of a pen or pencil in my hand, the sound of graphite scratching paper, and I love the sight of a nice black line making its way across the page. So why choose traditional art over digital? Traditional art has an organic, natural quality that seems to be missing from most digital illustrations. The illustrated books and comics that were made in the days before digital have an excellence and staying power that is just as vibrant now as it was decades ago. These are the stories that stay with you. Dr. Seuss, Winnie the Pooh, Where the Wild Things Are. People still read these. I'm currently working on my own graphic novel series, Legend of the Swordbearer, and I've also had the privilege to draw graphics for 2 motion comic series, along with illustrations for a small magazine, Logosophia magazine, and various book covers. Don't let traditional art fade into the dust. Help me keep it alive. You won't regret it. Visit my website at ianthomaswilson.com for more info.
We are back once again in the trenches with Ian Wilson, talking about old school fantasy flicks versus new school fantasy flicks. Is one better? Post or pre-Lord of the Rings? We have much to talk about, and it may be a multi-parter on Poets at War!
On this computer. So, how you been, man? Alive. Are you awake and alive in the vein of Skillet? And it froze.
Yes.
Okay.
very much. Well, actually, for a while there, I was
thinking.
Am I released?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. All right. That might happen again. If it does, we'll try something else.
Mm-hmm.
I just got an update that told me that Zoom will no longer be supported after August. So
that's weird. Well, it should at least be supported through the Chrome browser, I would think. But
I would think so too, but you never know with these things.
Yeah. Google's so totalitarian, you never know.
Yeah, they just make stuff up as they want.
Well, this is actually historic because I believe this is the first time, I could be wrong, but I think it's the first time you've been on video on Poets at War.
Oh, well, hey.
It's Ian. You guys see him all the time, or hear him all the time in the ad read for his art, because I do that on a lot of the episodes. So you guys know his art. You've seen a lot of it with what I've been doing, and it's been a little while since you've been on. So you're awake and alive, like Skillet, and you're busy with lots of different kinds of art, I'm sure, at the moment.
Yeah. Well, like 3 right now.
Like 3 clients or something like that? That's awesome.
3 projects.
Good.
Basically.
Excellent. So
on the floor.
Oh, it's all good. So yeah, we decided to come together, and since this is our, I think, 4th conversation on Poets at War, have a more specific topic. And you'd actually did some research. I've seen some old films, and so I wasn't able to have enough time to watch some more films. But I wanted to talk about fantasy films in particular. Basically everything before Lord of the Rings and everything after Lord of the Rings, because it's like Lord of the Rings changed the game. Everyone knows that. Yeah. And kind of what, to me, there's a certain thing that's missing from newer fantasy, but there's also stuff in newer fantasy that was never in the old, and it's not just special effects. So I guess just what films did you research? I guess we'll go with that, and then talk about those and see what you thought.
So it's been, I don't know, almost 10 years since I saw The Dark Crystal, but that was one of the earliest. No, I'm wrong. The Star Wars trilogy. We'll start with that.
Yeah,
I mean, everybody has seen the Star Wars.
And everyone knows it's fantasy. It's sci-fi, but it's fantasy. Like its core is fantasy.
It's fantasy in space. You've got space wizards, you've got space monsters, you've got space dark lords. It's fantasy. It's clearly a fantasy. So anyway, yeah, everything's Star Wars, and Star Wars is probably the best example of a 1970s, 1980s fantasy film that I can think of.
For sure.
Because of the fact that it didn't stay in genre, if you understand what I'm meaning. It mashed up genres. It wasn't concerned about being hard fantasy or hard science fiction. It was just like, oh yeah, we're gonna have spaceships and swords. Yeah. Why not? Yep. And they did that all the time in the 1960s and 70s and into the 80s with He-Man, and almost nobody remembers the Herculoids except I do.
I do, yeah.
I had the Herculoids.
I had boomerangs growing up. I didn't really watch them much. On occasion I did, but I'm aware of them, yeah. So
the Herculoids were amazing.
Yep, there's that weird sci-fi crossover thing that everyone was trying to do because of it was because of two things. One, it was because of guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger doing Conan, and then also Star Wars. They were trying to essentially do Conan and Star Wars together.
Yeah, it was So, and even before that, there was Flash Gordon, who he had a laser pistol, but he also had a sword.
Right. And he's one of the earliest examples of pre Lord of the Rings sci-fi fare. I haven't seen the was it a 60s or 70s movie? There was a 50s one too, I think, but it was a re-release. There was another one during that period. I want to say early 70s that existed.
There was so Flash Gordon was based on a comic book, which was a newspaper comic. It was a newspaper comic strip.
There's a 1980 Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
There is a 1980 Flash Gordon.
Right.
Before that, there was mid 1930s Flash Gordon that starred Buster Keaton. And he also played Tarzan.
And of course, the character goes back to comic books and radio shows. And everything else.
He's actually a ripoff of John Carter of Mars.
Yeah, he is. Edgar Rice Burroughs, man, you can't get past him. He's so good.
And he probably didn't even care. I mean, he was alive at the time. It was just let them have fun. Yeah,
that seemed to be Edgar Rice Burroughs' entire motto is let it be fun. We're just gonna have fun.
When he died, I believe he put it in his will that Tarzan and all of his other properties would just go into the public domain so that everybody could use them.
Ooh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I believe that's how it works. Or it just went into a holding company, and they were very liberal with granting people permission. So I said, yeah, sure, you can use Tarzan. Go ahead.
My stuff's definitely going to my family, but if you don't have a family, man, throw it in the public domain. Sure. If no one's going to benefit from you that you care about, just give it to everybody. You know what I'm saying? That's really good. So, okay, well, getting back on topic, I heard you mention. No, it's okay. I heard you mentioned Highlander. You were watching Highlander, the Sean Connery, right?
Yeah. So I watched Highlander the other day. I saw part of it when I was much younger, but it didn't quite click with me at the time.
Right.
I watched it the other day and I was like, holy crap, this is a good movie.
I haven't seen it yet, but I know a ton of people who love it. So
it's a good movie. It's my friend Tom Adams, who we should get on the show sometime.
Okay.
That's his favorite movie. Yeah, Tom Adams, you should totally get him on the show. He'd be really interesting because he actually does the whole martial arts thing, which I do too. But he uses swords.
Very cool. I'm into swords.
My fists.
Your whole body is a weapon.
Yes.
Just slightly less effective than a sword. All right, yeah. I'm putting his name down to talk to you about later on. But yeah, so Highlander and I'm gonna bring up a couple that really stick out to me that really exude the 70s 80s vibe that I'm thinking of in particular, because that was sort of the big zenith before there was a big lull in the 90s and fantasy got relegated to camp, along with superheroes and a lot of other stuff. But in the 80s, with the Dungeons and Dragons craze and all the other stuff that was going on, the two big ones that exude that period, I'll say three. Everyone loves Princess Bride. It almost goes without saying. Princess Bride is incredible. It's an amazing piece of cinema, no matter how you slice it. But the other two don't get mentioned as much. Willow, I think, is one of the most underrated fantasy movies of all time. And they're coming out to see that one. They're coming out with a new series on Disney Plus. I know it won't do it justice, but the fact that they have what's his face. Why can I not think of his name?
Warwick Davis.
Warwick Davis, yes, and brought back Val Kilmer too. Is nice. Pretty sweet, and so it might be interesting. But then the other one is Legend. Legend doesn't get mentioned a whole lot except for Tim Curry being Tim Curry and Tom Cruise being very young.
Yes.
So, but I really feel like both of those have this wide-eyed wonder that tended to get lost after Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings is such hardcore fantasy. Like, it is like you are in this world, and yes, you are alien to it, but the people in it are not alien to it at all. They are totally part of it. Whereas with both Willow and Legend, even though these characters live in this world, they're setting off on such an alien journey to them that you really connect with them experiencing all the weirdness, that seemed to be a bigger thing pre Lord of the Rings, and we haven't really gotten back to it. They kind of attempted it with Narnia a little bit, the Narnia films, because Narnia is so that vein.
It is.
But
I think,
go ahead.
The only other fantasy film that I've seen that can even come close to that is the 2004 Hellboy movie. Mm-hmm. It has that kind of 80s feeling to it.
It really does. Yeah. I haven't seen the whole thing. I've seen bits and pieces, and when I say bits and pieces, probably like 2/3 of the movie years ago. But yeah, so I mean, I totally get the vibe and agree with you. They kind of did a throwback with that one. And that's the thing. You get a few throwbacks here and there, but there's just a feel to the earlier fantasy stuff, particularly sword and sorcery. I'm getting away from the Star Wars thing. I'm obviously, they brought back Mandalorian, and that has more of the feel that people are wanting, but like talking specifically about like the sword and sorcery kind of thing, because there was I'm noticing too, going through I created a list and sent it to you, and we talked about doing a podcast, and we may do it in the future or something else, or some other sort of thing where you're going through these old films and giving your thoughts on them. But we both want to see a lot of these old films, and I'm noticing there was sort of two genres at the time. The one was sword and sorcery. Well, three really. The space fantasy, the sword and sorcery, and then there was this third category, the barbarian. And the barbarian thing has definitely gone by the wayside, I think partially because steroids have gone by the wayside. But you can probably speak to that more than I can, because a lot of the way you draw your characters is very 70s, 80s, and their hairstyles and all the other kinds of things that you do. Like I really love that. You can do modern, but you like to kind of put those in. You're very inspired by the sort of Led Zeppelin fantasy kind of thing in the way that your the look of your characters and stuff is, especially in Emrys. But like, what did the barbarian genre do right, and what have we lost in that post Lord of the Rings? Did they do anything well?
That's hard to say, because I haven't actually seen the original Conan the Barbarian film. I have read the books. I have not seen the film. I wish that I had, because then I can actually speak about that intelligently.
Right.
But I'll talk about it from the books, because I know those better. I'm thinking what happened was there was this ethos from like the 1920s all the way through the 1980s of this sort of He-Man masculinity. These guys that were just super virile and heroic, and like John Carter of Mars, Conan,
right.
Call the Conqueror, name any of those characters, Tarzan. That after like 1990, people started like, I don't know, making fun of it. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but right about 1990, it started getting relegated to just bad, campy movies. And
that makes me think, could this have gone with the rise and fall of 80s pro wrestling? Could that have been sort of the wave that Hollywood was riding? Because Hulkamania and everything else, like everything in the WWF, basically crashed in the 90s because all the big stars went to WCW down in Atlanta, and they had their big boom in the late 90s, but the early 90s was a crapshoot because this new company didn't know what they were doing with all this great talent, right? It was a newer company, and they had all this money, and they bought all the big top players from Vince McMahon in the late 80s, early 90s, and then had no clue what to do with them for about 5 or 6 years, and then they had a big comeback in the late 90s when everything went all edgy, so maybe that had something to do with it, because Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage and all these guys, they were huge because of the physique, and I wonder if that had something to do with it. Just pop culture consciousness,
I don't know that it's pop culture though, because now we're getting into biology, but if you look at the statistics, testosterone in men has gone way down since 19.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I'm no exception to that rule. I mean, look at me. Just kidding. Anyway, but in the average man in the United States, testosterone is much lower than it was in the 1960s or the 1950s or the 1930s. So that may have something to do with it. I don't know. No idea. You definitely had more of a gym culture in the 1980s.
Yep.
You look at my dad's generation. He was like late boomer, really, really late boomer, and all the guys went to the gym and worked out, and a lot of people took some, not stimulants, supplements that maybe they shouldn't have been taking.
Right.
But it was a culture, and there was a certain type of masculinity that was popular throughout the early to mid to late 20th century up until the 1990s, and then it just kind of fell off. And then,
Right.
Do I know what happened? No. I think the world just kind of got cynical at that point.
Yeah, did we lose anything from not having the barbarian genre, do you think? Like, is there something in that masculinity that you're talking about that we could benefit from, you know?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. I certainly think so. There's a certain type of man who just says, I don't care about your stupid rules. I'm going to do what's right.
Right.
Your stupid rules of your stupid society are dumb, and I'm going to do what I think is right.
Right.
I'm going to follow my conscience. My conscience tells me your rules suck.
Yeah. So moving on into the kind of sword and sorcery section, you know, Dungeons and Dragons was really huge during this time, and all that kind of stuff, and people were interested in the idea of magic again. That really kind of happened. I would put it around 82, 83. It was a little bit later into the 80s than right at the beginning. But like, I think, have you seen Legend?
I wish I had.
Okay. You've seen Dark Crystal, though.
I've seen Dark Crystal.
It's that same kind of ethos as Dark Crystal. You know, it's this this idea of very ancient magic. Secret of Nim is another great example, and the animated film Secret of Nim. Don Bluth, you've seen that one or no?
Another movie I haven't seen. It's on my list. It's on my list, man.
Man, we should really just
we picked the wrong day to do this because I don't know. A few months ago,
we may just have to do a part 2.
we will have to do a part 2.
Yeah.
A few months ago, all of these movies were available on streaming on Amazon, and I should have just taken advantage of it then.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't have time. But then you come with this idea, and I'm like, okay, well, what do we have? Nothing. All right, we have Highlander. Okay, Highlander. We'll watch Highlander.
Well, what about let's move on. I mean, obviously there's things like Star Wars, but we didn't really want to get into that side of things. There's The Princess Bride, which is its own timeless thing. But now after Lord of the Rings, you know, there was this kind of big fantasy boom up until about the recession, a little bit before maybe. A lot of people were really wanting fantasy in various places. We got some pretty obscure kids books being but like well lauded children's books being pulled for movies such as Spiderwick Chronicles and Bridge to Terabithia, and you know, we had all these sort of B and C level productions happening, and I think they were good, some of them, you know, and just having more magic, you know, Lemony Snicket, Series of Unfortunate Events with Jim Carrey, there were some other ones going on, and it's just, I don't know, it felt like everyone had a nostalgia during that period for more than just the fantasy, and everyone, you know, post 9/11 was wanting to return and escape to these magical realms. At least that was my experience, especially after seeing something as monumental as Lord of the Rings. But like, I feel like the biggest thing that went missing was the magic. Even the special effects, you know, they're very rudimentary in the 80s, but like special effects for magic specifically do not have the same magic in the 2000s to me as the magic effects that they had in the 80s. I don't know. That's a very small thing, like on the surface, but I really think it really changes the feel. And then I think they put less production into music. That was another thing. except for Lord of the Rings, even Narnia, while the themes themselves were really good, I can't help but feel like Harry Gregson Williams had way less time than he needed to do Narnia justice. You know. What were some standouts to you as for good and bad in the 2000s for fantasy?
Boy. So after Lord of the Rings, we became very, very reliant on computer generated special effects, which has been to our detriment,
Mm-hmm.
because the more they use them, the more you can tell it's fake, or I can tell. I don't know.
Which is also ironic, because even though Peter Jackson used CG and didn't have a problem using it where it was needed, he was very much like, use the right effect for the scene. He did a lot of practical stuff in Lord of the Rings. But go ahead.
All the orcs, all the goblins, all the whatevers were practical effects. The only things that weren't were things that you couldn't do, like Olafants and Gollum and what are those called? Those trolls. Obviously, you can't do those with practical effects, or if you did, it would be extremely expensive.
Right.
So, actually, my sister and I were talking about this one time. It would have been really awesome if Jim Henson had done Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
In the 1980s, with the puppets. Puppet hobbits would be kind of weird looking, but come on.
Oh, it's doable. The kind of stuff he did with the Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, So
it was amazing stuff. But yeah, we got away from doing practical effects at that point. I think the worst fantasy movie from the 2000s I've seen would probably be Spiderwick Chronicles.
It just doesn't have any magic in it, man. Like it's full of magic, but there's no magic. There's no real wonder.
I can't. Yeah, that's it. There's no wonder. I can't take that film seriously.
Yeah.
I read the books. The books were all right. I wouldn't put them on the same footing as like Narnia or the Lloyd Alexander novels. I wouldn't put them there, but they're okay. They're fine.
Right. They were decent.
But the film was just like, it is so mediocre that I barely remember watching it.
Right. And don't get us wrong, there were some bad fantasy movies in the 80s. Honestly, though, I feel like they were fun compared to the 2000s, you know?
I started watching Beastmaster. It's like one of my Twitter friends said, Beastmaster's awesome. You'll love it. I started watching it and I was like, this is so badly acted. I am feeling physical pain.
Just the trailers, man. Just the trailers on that one are enough for me. Like, I want to see it, but like, yeah, it's crazy. Another one that kind of stood out to me in this way. What was I gonna say? When you're thinking of the bad movies, you think of stuff like there was a very subgenre of the He-Man masculinity, which was the She-Ra style stuff, where they did the female barbarian kind of thing. Yeah. And there's several of those films that I'm just like, wow, this is dumb. This is like basically one of them that someone said was really, really bad, because apparently the books are good to some people at least, but they did a Red Sonja movie, and apparently that one was like super disappointing. But like, imagine. One of the biggest disappointments for me in any fantasy film was all the trailers in Bridge to Terabithia made it seem like this was a library version of Narnia, like essentially like kind of doing, which that's one of the only 90s fantasy movies that really stands out to me, is The Pagemaster. And we can get into that one in a minute if you've seen it. But you need to see The Pagemaster. I'll get into it a little bit, but not right this second. But basically, the Bridge to Terabithia. I don't know if you've seen this one, but have you seen Bridge to Terabithia or no?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Do you know the plot of the book?
My mother explained it to me. It was basically these kids that were being bullied and made up a world that they could escape to, or something like that.
Yes, but how much spoiler do you want here?
Bruh, I don't care about spoilers.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Don't.
All right, okay, so I'll spoil this and Page Master, but the Bridge to Terabithia, there's this boy and this girl, and they become friends, and they create all these worlds and magic in the woods and blah 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 blah. But the story has nothing to do with their actual world, like at all. They use the world to deal with their own problems in day-to-day life, and it's like a psychological study of them, until the girl tries to swing across a creek and dies. And the main thrust of the movie is the boy dealing with the grief that he's left with this magical world that he and his friend created, but his friend is gone.
Wow, that is dark.
Extremely dark, and it's just this, and it's done in the vein of like Because of Winn-Dixie, right? It's done in this sort of slice of life, like That Summer When I Was a Kid sort of vibe, and it's that kind of movie and has nothing to do with fantasy whatsoever. But all the trailers were like, this is a lower budget story version of Narnia. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
And I'm like, you made me sit through this slice of life summer nonsense when I wanted a fantasy movie.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the kind of stuff they would do because they were trying to capitalize on Lord of the Rings, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
like people are still trying to capitalize on Game of Thrones, but that's a whole other thing. But if we could get to that, but I need to get to Page Master. Okay. So basic idea and premise. I like pitching movies to people to watch. So basically we have Macaulay Culkin as the main character. He is this kid who totally has like he's Mr. Statistics and Mathematics and is afraid of every little thing. Like he literally like does statistics on whether or not what the odds are he's gonna die today. Like he's that kind of kid. So his dad, he ends up through a series of events getting stuck in a library during a rainstorm, and he and the librarian there are the well, is it a bookstore or is it a library? I think it's technically a library, but anyway, it's a big old library, like a downtown kind of library. Yeah. And the only two people there are him and the librarian is played by Christopher Lloyd.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes. And it's one of my favorite performances of his. And he is so magical in the 90s, like Angels in the Outfield.
You have my full attention already.
Yes. Okay.
Christopher Lloyd.
So basically, he gets knocked out. This is all live action up to this point. Mm-hmm. He gets knocked out by slipping on some water on the marble floor in this library. And he ends up passing out, and when he wakes up, it's still a dream, and it's obvious, but to him it's real. He's actually I won't spoil the scene, but he becomes 2D animated. Okay. So the rest of the movie, pretty much, except for the very ending, is 2D animated, and it's him going into the books with 3 other books that are his companions. One voiced by Frank Welker, who's a horror book.
Of course.
Second voiced by Patrick Stewart, who is a pirate adventure book. And the third being a fantasy book voiced by Whoopi Goldberg.
Okay, you lost me there.
I know. But it's, trust me, like
fantasy.
It has some dumb 90s moments with the Whoopi Goldberg stuff. Of course, yeah. But the whole point of the story is like he goes through this whole transformation of being afraid at the beginning of every little tiny thing that can happen in the world, to going through these books and being strengthened by the adventures that he goes through in these books. And of course, they're doing the metaphor that you read these books to gain strength, right, for the real world. And at the end, he actually meets the person who he's trying to get to, sort of like Wizard of Oz. There's the wizard at the end. There's the Page Master. And so basically he gets to the Page Master and he says essentially, you know, you're the guy who did all this to me. You have any idea what I've been through? What's wrong with you? You know, kind of thing. And he says, yet you stand before me. And how much stronger are you now? And it's like he's having a moment with God, basically. You know what I'm saying? And he says,
Okay, wow.
He said, and this is Christopher Lloyd's voice doing it, the wizard, you know, and he says, think, boy, what kind of lesson would you have learned if I had brought you here with the turn of a page? And he goes back and relives with him all these things that he's been through, you know, and it's just incredible how good it is. Like, people don't, there's some dumb 90s stuff in it and some like things that don't, that totally take you out of it and whatever. But some people might find it nostalgic if you grew up in the 90s, whatever. But like, man, the beginning and ending is incredible. Sure, the middle has some but it's so good. Anyway.
It sounds like a movie that Jordan Peterson should watch, honestly.
There you go. Like I said, they go through these very, in the middle they go through like little snippets of various, you know, classics like Treasure Island and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But the one complaint I hear a lot of people say is you don't stay there long enough in any of these little spots. Like he has 5 minutes with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He has 5 minutes with what is his name? Dying bad guy pirate, Treasure Island, Long John Silver. Thank you. Why am I blanking on Long John Silver? That makes no sense. Anyway, but yeah, it's one of the very few fantasy movies from the 90s, and it does so good at kind of bridging the gap between the 80s and the 2000s, what would come with Lord of the Rings and stuff. So
yeah. No, I get you. So,
but
okay.
Yeah. What other ones have you seen? So you talked about Highlander. You can gush on that, or anything in either side that really stands out to you that especially underrated.
So, Highlander it's a really good movie. It was actually better than I was expecting. My expectations were kind of low, but I went into it with an open mind, and I was like, wow, this is really, really good. I'm totally engaged right here. And it was kind of campy with the sword fights. Some of them you could kind of tell were fake.
Right.
You know? But the stakes were very high with this one. Because I hope I don't spoil it for
you. Can spoil. Like,
okay.
I'm fine. Yeah. I'm the same way.
Basically, the Highlander is this guy who is a Highlander. He lives in the Scottish Highland. He's from Clan MacLeod. And he's an immortal. He was born immortal. He can't be killed unless you lop off his head. So these immortals live throughout the world, and they've been here since there have been humans, and they've just been going around killing each other to gain power. Every time he kills someone, he kills another immortal, he gains the power from their spirit. And there's the villain is the Kurgan. He's this ancient barbarian warrior who just thrives on cruelty. He is the worst of the worst of the worst. I mean, imagine if the worst human you can think of, Adolf Hitler, for example, lived forever. He would be this guy. It's just total depravity taken to its logical conclusion. And eventually there's going to be this big battle, this like Armageddon battle between the immortals to decide who gets the prize. What's the prize? Ultimate knowledge. So imagine if the most evil person on Earth gained ultimate knowledge. It would destroy humanity.
Ultimate knowledge was the friends we gained along the way. No, I'm joking. I'm just saying, having a Goonies ending to something like that would be hilarious. There's another one, Goonies. I haven't seen that, but I want to see it. Go ahead.
So, yeah, it had kind of a dark atmosphere, but at the same time, there was this light and this optimism like he's been through all of this bad crap, but there's a prize at the end that he has to strive toward to be his ultimate self.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that's missing in modern fantasy films. It's all about, today it is all about self-fulfillment, but self-fulfillment, selfish fulfillment.
Right.
We'll put it that way.
We're fighting for autonomy.
Yeah,
against an evil empire.
Exactly. Yeah. We're fighting for just ourselves and our own wants and needs and so forth. Whereas in the 1980s, I'll say the 1980s, I think that changed in the 1990s. The 1980s, it was more about finding self-fulfillment for the benefit of society. You know, it's like Jordan Peterson says, clean up your room. You have to better yourself before you can go out and change the world.
I'm imagining Jordan Peterson as a Muppet now, and I'm really loving it.
You know, when he goes on tour, he has a little Kermit the Frog puppet. I'm not even kidding.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
So anyway, that's what I liked about it. The practical effects were good. The Kurgan's armor was fantastic. He has this armor that has like skulls and bones all over it.
As Connery the Kurgan?
What's that?
Is Connery the Kurgan?
No, Connery is
the good guy.
He's the mentor figure.
Oh, okay, the mentor figure. Okay.
He's the mentor figure of the Highlander. The Kurgan is played by Clancy Brown.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Who does a masterful job.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there's one scene where the Highlander is lighting candles in a church because it's his first wife's birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And he lights a candle for her every year on her birthday. And the Kurgan just barges in and starts basically trying to desecrate the church and be as offensive as possible. And the priest asks him to leave, and he's like, or what? What are you going to do? And it just goes to show how absolutely depraved this man is. So I think that's one thing we're missing is what we've made villains too sympathetic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things Lord of the Rings absolutely does right every time.
Ooh, yes.
Other than the fact that we don't know a whole lot about him. You can say you could have done a little bit more on Sauron in particular in the movies, but we know a lot about him when it comes to the Legendarium, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit different that way. But yeah, I don't know, man. There's so many good ones we have yet to see. There's so many good ones that we have yet to do and watch together, and we're just gonna have to come back to this for sure.
We certainly will.
So like tell me, you know, a little bit more. I know that, you know, with Emrys and Swordbearer, you know, especially with the hair, I'm seeing very ABBA-esque hair on a lot of your characters. You know what I'm saying? And I don't make fun of it. I think it looks awesome for what you're doing. Like, where did that come from? If you haven't seen all these old movies,
to be honest, most of it is historically accurate.
There you go.
If you look at depictions of the popular hairstyles during the Roman era, during the Celtic era, during the sub-Roman era, most of them looked sort of 1980s.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. The Irish, most of them would like cut the sides of their head short and leave the back long like a mullet. The upper crust would sort of cut it in this sort of bowl cut thing. It's funny that you notice the hair. I didn't really even think about it. It's just like, okay, what's
accurate?
What's accurate?
That is really funny. Okay, yeah. so let's say, like, okay, Since we're gonna return to this, we've decided we're gonna return to this and just kind of talk about them in chunks, not dig into one movie too deeply or anything.
Right.
What are you most looking forward to? I definitely have at least one that I'm like, I cannot wait to see it because it just looks so weird. But what stands out to you, if anything, that you're most excited for, good or bad?
One of my Catholic friends on Twitter is a huge fan of Legend.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that she's talked about it, the way that she's described it, makes me really want to see it.
Right.
It sounds like a really, really fantastic movie. And even if it's not as good as I'm hoping it will be, it'll at least be visually striking.
My take on Legend is it feels like you're on drugs while watching it, but not in a way where you feel disoriented, in a way that you feel taken along a journey by a trip, like you're in a dream the entire time. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
If it feels very, very otherworldly to the point where you actually feel engulfed by it. There's no way you can like take 2 seconds and look away to someone and say, "Oh yeah, I do want popcorn," and then look back. Like that feels like it's happening it's like an out of body experience. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. So that's kind of the feel I get from Legend. And for that reason, I like it, but there's some good, there's some bad, but the one that I'm most looking forward to is Xanadu. It's a fantasy musical weirdness love story thing that like has Olivia Newton-John and Don Bluth or no, it's not. Is it? Not, I don't think it's Don Bluth. I think it might be Ralph Bashki, but it's one of those guys doing the 2D animated like music videos in between basically, and it's like its own little weird opera, and it flopped at the box office so hard, and it's just like it's basically like a girl from another world falls in love with a guy, and she like tries to take him to her world, the world of Xanadu, and it's all like dancing and swords and sorcery, the other random weird Ralph Bashki style animation, even if it's not him. So like,
oh my gosh, that sound. Yeah, my mother showed me a clip from that, and
it's so weird.
I was like, how high am I?
Oh,
what
boy.
did I just watch? Then again, my favorite music video is still Men Without Hats, the safety dance. So
it's so
do with
good.
that what you will.
That's a fantasy movie in and of itself. Like it's so good. Not fantasy related, but an 80s thing that I don't know if I've ever shared it with you. But are you familiar with One Night in Bangkok?
I've never even heard of that.
Okay, it's a music video. It's a song that was a hit in the 80s, but it came from a musical called Chess, the musical. And it is a musical about competitive chess. And I know I've never seen the musical. I have hardly listened to any of the other songs. I have some, but basically the plot, and by the way, the guy who sings it is Murray Head, who is the brother of Anthony Stewart Head, who plays Giles in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So that's a weird thing. But basically the song and the moment in the plot is these nerdy guys go to Bangkok, Thailand, and they are all virgins and have to stay focused on winning the chess tournament and not getting into all the brothels. And so the song One Night in Bangkok is basically like the city calling to this guy who's a nerd, and him just like confidently moving down the boardwalk saying I'm not going to be having, I'm not doing that over there. He actually has a line in it where he goes, I get my kicks above the waistline, sunshine. It's this really like unbelievably funky song. Like if you like funk music at all, like 70s 80s funk music, this might be one of the absolute best bass lines in any song ever. Like it's this really really good song. I'm gonna send it to you right now so I don't forget. But
it has to be really phenomenal to outdo Spoon Man, but I'm just saying.
Well, yeah, or anything Parliament did, but yeah, it's one of my very favorites. But anyway, so with that said, we'll go ahead and wrap up here, and let me just pause myself and do this. I can edit it out later if I want, or I can just keep talking. Shh, quiet ad. There we are. And then copy. We don't do any editing on the show. What am I talking about? There we go. Okay. So
no editing. We die like men.
Yeah, exactly. Hoisted on our own petard. Okay. So I sent that to you. We're going to come back and do more fantasy movies and talk about these sorts of things. Absolutely. Because we have to. So I'm going to wrap this, and then I got something to tell you about our lore project we're working on, and then we'll sign off. But basically, guys, be your family's bard. Do not turn to the right or to the left, and the Lord will be with you wherever you go. We'll see you next time in the trenches, hopefully with some amazing fantasy flicks on Poets at War.
God of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betray thee, one sword at least I right shall guard, one faithful harp shall praise thee.